Well, good morning. A happy Sunday to you all. To understand the gospel reading today on the sea, you have to step back and realize that this particular reading follows the miracle where Jesus fed thousands of people. And that evening, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go to the opposite shore while he himself sent the crowds away. Think about it. My perspective, the disciples were really reluctant to go. Can you imagine? They were probably they were having a great time enjoying this miracle and the enthusiasm of the crowd who saw them as part of the miracle. They were basking in their role as part of the Jesus team. And the last thing they wanted to do was get in a boat and go to the other side. Jesus himself, after dismissing the crowds, went up into the hills to pray. In John's version of the feeding, we learn that the people, after being fed by Jesus, actually wanted to make him king. They, like the disciples, had totally missed the meaning of what was happening. Jesus' work is not to be seen in terms of crowd-pleasing miracles or supernatural powers. It is for him, as it should be for us, the quality of our relationships with God, with people, with ourselves. Jesus' mission and ours gets its significance in a life of service, sharing, and community building. It doesn't consist in having power over others and becoming an idol of the crowds. So then the story switches back to the disciples. They're now far out on the water, battling the sea, fighting a strong wind. And what we're kind of seeing is a little parable about the church itself, represented by the disciples in their fragile boat, completely surrounded by hostile winds and a raging sea. That was a very common experience for the early church. Those first centuries weren't a picnic. And in some ways, that persecution still continues in some parts of the world. But it was a situation that created, for them and for others, much fear and anxiety. So think about it. The disciples spent roughly 4 hours being tossed around on the water. Small fishing boat. Yeah, these things weren't that big. Maybe 30 feet for a big one. They were sick, tired, cold. And then out of the wind and the wave and the terror comes that comforting voice. Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. And Peter, in his typical fashion, exuberant and impulsive as always, says, if he too could walk on water, what a miracle. So he asked Jesus, call me to you, let me walk on water. Because Peter really wants out of that boat. It's a terrible place right now. But when he stepped out and started walking towards Jesus, he faltered. He felt the strong wind and the waves. He became frightened. He lost his confidence, and he began to sink. And then you hear, Lord, save me. It is the cry, a cry echoed by Christians down the ages who have felt that the world was ready to crash in upon them. Clearly something unique to reflect upon here. Remember, Jesus isn't in the boat. He's in the hostile environment into which we often are afraid to enter. It's sometimes easier to stay huddled up in our boat. And I think it's significant that Jesus is found outside the boat in the middle of the stormy sea He's out in the real world. And he's calling us to go out there too, to meet him in spite of the dangers and possible setbacks. And too often we spend much, if not all of our time, hiding in the shelter of our boat, instead of stepping out into the stormy sea to help others. As thinkers and feelers, professors and preachers, healers and givers, mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, the urgent and life-threatening issues of our world can often cause us to be overwhelmed, and we begin to sink just because of our doubt and fear. The conclusion then is that Jesus can also be found in the boat, but only when we are ready to leave that shelter of the boat to find him in the world. We have to be ready to step into the world and come back to our boat, but we have to be prepared to leave our boat. All in all, today's gospel reflects many problems in the early church, and some which are still known to us today. From the inside, there were always problems of unity, opinions, different theologies. From the outside, there were persecutions, misunderstandings from both the Jews and the secular powers. But when we look out into our world, we're a unique community. We've experienced many natural disasters. So, in stepping out into our world, one of the obvious things today is, in some way, we should all be prepared to try and help the people in Hawaii. And even closer to home, you can think of places like Casa Juan Diego or the Christian Community Service Center. All good reasons to leave the shelter of your boat and try and help someone in need. We can all remember the disciples at Pentecost, hiding behind those locked doors. But Pentecost changed them and literally blew them out on a mission that would bring them and their successors to the remotest parts of our world. And there are dangers in the world. And the church, like Peter, is at times weak and vulnerable. But the Lord is there wherever we go. And he will not allow the church to sink. It's kind of put beautifully today in that first reading when Elijah is told to go and stand on the mountain before the Lord, and the Lord himself passes by. But he wasn't in the wind, and he wasn't in the earthquake, and he wasn't in the fire. He was, however, in that sound of a gentle breeze. And Elijah knew the Lord was present. No different for us. We feel that gentle breeze in those times of trial when Jesus is with us. Even though we're more concerned about the winds, the earthquake, and the fire, we need to look for that gentle breeze, that affirmation, I am with you, take courage. And that will give us the spirit and the courage to step out from our boat into that raging world in which we live.
Please like, subscribe, or comment below.